Hello, this is Martin.
This is Lauren. We are 2/3 of the band CHVRCHES, and you are listening to the CHVRCHES Podcast.
Number 24 for September 7th, 2017. Welcome to CHVRCHES Fan Podcast for Saturday, September 7th, 2017. This is the 24th CHVRCHES Fan Podcast. My name is Steve Holden, and I'm recording this fan-inspired podcast in Southern California near San Diego. Our last podcast was back on July 21st, 2017. I took a little longer than expected getting this podcast out because I was taking a summer class from the University of California, San Diego. The class is now over, and I'm pretty sure we will be getting back to a regular schedule. At a bare minimum, my goal is to get a podcast out every month. Best case would be a podcast out every 2 weeks. I'll always post updates on my Twitter feed at CHVRCHES Podcast if anybody is wondering on what the schedule looks like. Today's podcast consists of a ton of CHVRCHES news, the third and the final part of fan Q&A with Bruce from Texas, who's at McMillan1776 on Twitter, and part 4 of 4 of an interview that the band recorded in 2013 before the Recover EP was released. The song segment that kicked off this podcast was Gun from CHVRCHES' first album, The Bones of What You Believe. It is the third song on that album, but it was also released as a single on July 15th, 2013, which is just a little over 4 years ago. According to Wikipedia, Gun was first played on Zane Lowe's BBC Radio 1 show on May 27, 2013. I think the lyrics are really my favorite part of this song. I'm always trying to visualize what the lyrics mean to the band from their experiences as I listen to the song. Also, that middle part with Lauren singing as the main focus really grabs me as the music starts to build up during the transition to the end of the song. I think I've heard more than one person call it brilliant. You can send me feedback, input, comments, suggestions, etc. on this fan-inspired podcast on Twitter at CHVRCHES Podcast. Just a friendly reminder that everything mentioned in this podcast that has a link will be in the detailed show notes at www.chvrchespodcast.com. Also, you can subscribe to this podcast via Apple Podcasts, Google Play Music, SoundCloud, and YouTube. Links to all those are on the podcast website. You can also listen to all or any single podcast via any web browser by just going to the website and clicking on the audio file icon on your computer or a mobile device. I am so proud to announce that we have our third CHVRCHES Fan Podcast bumper, thanks to Mike Calhoun, who is at CHITOWNMIKEC on Twitter, for doing this. So we're going to listen to that now and then roll into the news.
You are listening to the CHVRCHES Podcast.
Okay, let's get to the news for today's podcast. There are 8 items that I'd like to share that cover new news since the last podcast. So, news item number 1. So what's the latest news related to CHVRCHES' third album? We're going to get an update here from Ben, who is at VaderJods on Twitter. If you'd like to follow on Twitter the commentary related to CHVRCHES' third album, then follow the hashtag CHV3.
Thanks, Steve, and greetings, fellow fans. It's been a relatively quiet 6 weeks for CHV3 news. Since the last podcast, the band has continued to enjoy the summer, while remaining mum on any third album updates or developments. There was, however, one intriguing image that raised quite some speculation and fervor amongst fans. Back on August 15th, the band posted on Twitter and Instagram a close-up picture of a Highland Spring water bottle next to Lauren with the caption, "Product of Scotland." Lauren then reposted the same image and caption, but added the hashtag CHV3. Fans were quick to ask if the Product of Scotland or Highland Spring phrases were referencing potential album titles. These questions were neither confirmed nor denied, and so the speculation continues. Fans were also treated to a little band humor from Lauren when she replied to CHVRCHES fan Carla Acosta, who is @_CarCarla. She tweeted back on August 29th, "Hey Lauren, Martin, and Ian, where is CHV3? Need this album and a show, please." Lauren responded with a GIF image of Tina Fey zipping her lips. Now, to our knowledge, the band has no plans yet to cover the Go-Go's, but if they ever do, here's guessing the first track would be Our Lips Are Sealed.
Thank you, Ben, for a great update and for stepping up and recording your awesome input. I think hearing directly from you makes the podcast better than me just reading your input. So thanks a lot for doing that. News item number 2. The Everything Flows blog published on August 21st a post entitled "Thanks, 10 Years of Blog," which covers 10 of the author's best live show blog articles. According to the article, the shows were listed in no particular order. So if you go to the post, and yes, the link will be in the show notes, and scroll down to item number 7, you'll find Churches at the Art School, which was originally published on July 5th, 2012, with the following commentary, and I quote from the article: "I've seen loads of great shows by unsigned bands and heard all kinds of rumors about labels coming up to scout, but never in all my gig-going years have I experienced anything like I did at the first official show of CHVRCHES. The buzz was enormous, almost as big as their shiny pop tunes. They delivered and then some." End quote. So that perspective is pretty cool and fits in very nicely to our recent anniversary article about that concert. News item number 3. CHVRCHES are going to be featured in some upcoming releases of the Archies comic book series. The release date for the first Archies comic is October 4th, 2017, but CHVRCHES are not expected to be in number 1, but in editions number 2 and 3, which is pretty exciting. There is a bunch of links in the show notes if you want to learn more information, including one from MTV, which has a video about the news. My plan is to go down to my local comic book store and subscribe to get them there. I think this whole series is going to be a total of 6 comics. My goal is to get all 6, just so it's a complete set. News item number 4. The Australian radio station Triple J has been recording bands performing covers in their show Like a Version, and they have announced that CHVRCHES' cover of Arctic Monkeys' Do You Want to Know and Robert DeLong's cover of CHVRCHES' song The Mother We Share will be in a compilation that will be released in North America on September 27th, 2017. And news item number 5, the site Your EDM has an interesting article entitled "The Most Recognizable Sound Effects from the 80s is Making a Comeback." The effect is called the gated reverb drums, and the one new example, according to the article, is CHVRCHES' song The Mother We Share, along with a long list of others including M83, Prince, Phil Collins, Peter Gabriel, Bleachers, and the list goes on. Along with the post is a video on the topic and a long Spotify playlist with all the bands and songs that they highlighted that have this effect in their music. The link, of course, will be in the show notes. The list of songs and bands is pretty impressive, and it's very nice that CHVRCHES got a big shout out in the article. News item number 6. This is an emerging story. Hopefully we'll get some more information into this in the next podcast. But back in early August on eBay UK, there was a post for a CHVRCHES instrumental 18-track CD that was labeled promotional item. They had 5 available for purchase, and I was contacted by a podcast listener who purchased one of these. I've heard parts of the 18 tracks, and I've lined several of them up in my audio editing program with the songs that I have in my library from CHVRCHES CDs. They are very, very close replications or copies of what I think are actually originally mastered CHVRCHES songs without the main lyrics. If anyone has any more information they'd like to share about these songs or this CD, then please let me know. I'd like to pass it along to podcast fans. The 18 tracks include a mix of songs from the first 2 albums. I have a picture of the eBay posting in the show notes if you're interested to see the album cover for this CD. So item number 7. So Lauren Mayberry and Justin Long have posted a new short film for The Girls' Home, which was filmed, produced, and edited by Andrew Sutton and Rachel Collingwood. The video includes a progress report on what has been happening recently at The Girls' Home and reveals future plans for The Girls' Home, which is in Granada, Nicaragua. Links on how you can support them and to watch the video are in the show notes. We have covered the impact that The Girls' Home is doing for the girls staying there in past podcasts. I think their work is very important, and my family has been blessed being able to support them. So the last item, news item number 8, Lauren Mayberry and David Simpson, who's at DSimpsonMusic on Twitter, recently wrote and performed a song called Ballad for a Friend for the soundtrack of a new Funny or Die miniseries called The Real Stephen Blatt, starring Justin Long. You can watch Season 1 of The Real Stephen Blatt on Amazon Prime Video. There will be a link in the show notes to the full video, but here's a small sample of the song. If you have any news that you would like to share with other fans, then please let me know on Twitter at CHVRCHES Podcast or send me email at churchespodcast@gmail.com. You can also check out the links in the show material for a couple of items that didn't quite make it into the newsworthiness of this section. There's a funny video of Lauren doing some random singing and vocal training, and there's also a great instrumental of The Mother We Share that is quite remarkable. That short song segment was Leave a Trace, which is the second song from Church's second album, Every Open Eye. The single of Leave a Trace was released on July 17, 2015 in 2 formats, 12-inch vinyl and digital download. Here's what Lauren told the site Pitchfork about this song.
Leave a trace is the middle finger mic drop. It's about that point where you're like, there's no point having this conversation anyways, there will be no resolve. I won't feel better about it. You won't feel better about it. No outcome from this will actually change my reality. It makes me feel better to write about that. I've done something constructive with it. You don't put that on other people, you put that into what you do. That's always the way I've written lyrics. My ex-partners are not friends with me, but I'm okay with that.
Okay, so obviously that wasn't Lauren's voice, but I've been playing around with Amazon's voice services called Polly, and I thought I'd weave it into the podcast when it appears to make sense. Let me know if you like it, hate it, or whatever. Your feedback is always appreciated. Today's fan Q&A interview is the last part of Bruce's answers to our standard set of 12 CHVRCHES fan questions. His previous answers were in the last 2 podcasts, You can follow and connect with Bruce on Twitter. He's at McMullen1776. We start off with Bruce answering question number 9, which is there a question or topic related to churches that I should have asked you about, but didn't?
I'm not sure if this is the place for it, but maybe who are some of the other fans you have met at shows? Have you seen or talked to them at other churches' shows? Also, again, I don't know if this would be the place to ask this, but maybe comment on the opening band that played with churches at a particular show.
Bruce, those are some really good questions to consider adding to our list of questions for fan interviews. I'll definitely consider it in the future. The next question is Ian's with, what is your all-time favorite film?
The Blues Brothers. I'm a big fan of Saturday Night Live, and seeing John Belushi and Dan Aykroyd take the characters they developed from the Blues Brothers musical sketch and make it into a movie set in Chicago, where I was born and lived when the movie first came out, was an unenjoyable time for me. The movie also had John Candy, another favorite of mine, and also Carrie Fisher was in it. On Lauren's Instagram, there is a photo of Lauren with some writing on her fingers, and I'm sure it was not intended, but right when I saw it, I thought that's just like Jake and Elwood from the Blues Brothers. I really liked the thought that in my mind, she might be a fan of the movie too. That movie has just stuck with me after all these years. To this day, whenever someone asks me my address, the first thing I say is 1060 West Addison. I'm still waiting for someone's response to be 1060 West Addison. That's Wrigley Field. I guess it's pretty dark sense of humor, and not many people get it.
That movie is definitely one of my favorite comedies. I'm not sure, though, I would be able to give you that comeback you were looking for on your answer to what is your address. I think I'd have to be from Chicago to really know that answer. The next question I have is from Lauren, and it is, what is your favorite quote?
I'm not sure if this is considered a quote. It's from my mom. She used to say, you can and you will. It's not famous, but I live by it to this day. Whenever I'm feeling like I can't achieve something, I just remember what my mom would say, you can and you will. It was meant to be encouraging.
Well, I definitely think that is a quote worth quoting. And when you first said it, I thought it was a very encouraging quote. It's probably because mom quotes can always be that way in one form or another. The last question is from Martin, and it is, what is your favorite non-Churches album?
The Cranberries' first album. Everyone else is doing it, so why can't we? I love the sound of Dolores' voice in general, but especially on Dreams and on Linger. Love that album. And pretty much all the subsequent Cranberries albums.
I'm definitely going to have to add that album by the Cranberries to my listening queue. Thanks for the recommendation and for answering the band's questions in this podcast. I also need to give Bruce a big shout out for sharing his awesome story and being a great part of the CHVRCHES fan community. If this is the first CHVRCHES fan podcast that you've listened to, then I highly recommend going back to podcast 22 and podcast 23 to listen to all of Bruce's answers. If you'd like to be a fan Q&A participant in the future, then please let me know at churchespodcast@gmail.com or message me on Twitter at churchespodcast.
You're listening to the CHVRCHES Podcast.
Today's band interview was recommended to the podcast by David, who's at DavidJames06 on Twitter. It is with Ian and Lauren and was recorded in 2013. It's the final part of a 4-part series we have been listening to over the last 4 podcasts. This was originally recorded and posted by FaceCulture, but I did do some audio production upgrades to level out all the audio between the 3 voices. I think it makes it more listenable, so please let me know what you think.
You've just finished the song yesterday. You already have a few songs. An album.
Yeah,
The album's getting there. It's getting there. We've got
we've got about 11 songs for the album and a few for an EP and a few that are still to be worked up, a few more still to write. So we're kind of hoping that an album will be out probably late summer, early autumn at the latest.
Yeah, I think hopefully. Am I allowed to talk about the EP?
Yeah, see what you like.
No one's told me I can't, so I'm going to talk about it anyway. I think we're going to be putting out an EP in the springtime, so there'll be something between now and the album anyway. So yeah, we've kind of been in our little basement making songs for EP and an album, and yeah, we're quite lucky that we can, because Ian and Martin are producers, we can kind of keep most of it quite close to home. We don't have to go into a studio and record with somebody else, so it's quite nice to have that amount of control over what we're doing.
Yes.
And how many songs will there be on the EP?
There'll be 3 original songs on the EP and probably 2 or 3 remixes.
Yeah, I think we're kind of figuring out what's going to be on it, but yeah, I think it'd be good to have something out now, because, well, not now, but in springtime. Yeah, because otherwise by the time the record comes out it'll have been a really long time since we put the first song out, and that's not a very nice thing to do. So yeah.
Will those songs also be on the album, or will the album?
One of them potentially will be on the album.
Yeah, I think it depends on what's the single and what people like, and there's nothing worse than if you've got 3 EPs by a band and then you buy the record and it's just all the same. You're like, what's the point? But then at the same time it's got nothing to link back to those things. That's always a bit weird. But as I say, we're still writing, so we don't really know a track list. It's all a bit vague at this stage.
This is the way to see it. And do you already have album titles or EP titles?
No,
not really. No, we started talking about it, but
yeah, people are rapping our knuckles. Being
we're really bad
titles.
at names for things, aren't we? The band name took months.
The question I have to ask, of course.
Oh, do you really?
Who came up with the with the 5 or the V symbol?
Oh,
Instead
that
of
was
the
it was Amy, I think.
Yeah, we have a designer that works for us in Australia.
Yeah.
Who came up with a logo where the U was like a Roman U, like the V. And we didn't really think about changing the actual band name to Churches with a V until we realised that typing churches into Google,
a lot of stuff comes up that's not related to us.
a lot of Jesus stuff.
Like I saw during my, when I used to read bad comments on the internet and then I stopped going on the internet, I saw someone be like, I don't understand what they're saying, but nothing comes up on Google when you type in churches. I typed in that and loads of stuff comes up, and I was like, relevant stuff. That doesn't make sense. Yes, if you type in that word, there'll be a lot of hits, but it's like about the Pope and stuff.
Yeah.
It's good for the Pope, but it's not good for me. So, yeah.
Do you visit churches a lot?
No. Avoid.
Avoid it.
But don't judge those who do.
And the
just in case.
Are you still happy with the name?
Yeah, I think
the
so.
name, yeah. It's memorable.
Yeah.
It's,
I guess someone pointed out to me there's like a glut of bands that have like a single word, but it's a plural.
Yeah.
Like Churches, Savages,
Foxes,
Pins, all these different things. But then I was like, well, but then there was a whole glut of the bands for a while, so you can't really, and it's not like you think about it when you're doing it. But I like the name. I think it's like vague and enigmatic enough to fit with, and it's quite strong imagery. And,
Plus we can change the name to The Churches if that becomes in vogue again.
I don't know that we should.
No, probably not.
Watch this space just in case.
Well, you know.
Yeah. We'll see.
Well, thank you for your time.
Yeah, thank you for having us
Cheers.
in this weird little setting. Yeah, thank you.
There's a bunch of things I like about this interview, as it gave a little prehistory for what we now know was the spring release of the Recovery EP. I also like the discussion about the name for the band and how the V got into the lettering. It was also funny for them to talk about the Churches, as I'm notorious for calling the band the Churches instead of Churches. And I have to police myself all the time. Again, thanks to David for sending us the links to these interviews. I really appreciate the help.
You're listening to CHVRCHES Podcast.
Well, we have reached the end of today's podcast content. Don't forget that everything mentioned in this podcast that has a link will be at the show notes at www.churchespodcast.com. Also, the website has links to subscribe to the podcast via Apple Podcasts, Google Play Music, SoundCloud, and YouTube. Thank you all for your very kind feedback I continue to get on Twitter at Churches Podcast and via email churchespodcast@gmail.com. I really appreciate it. I continue to be very thankful for our podcast bumper producers, Alyssa, Jeff, and now Mike Calhoun. If you have the talent to create a bumper that's 20 to 30 seconds long and want to have it played in a future podcast, then please let me know at churchespodcast@gmail.com. We can never have too many bumpers to cycle through, so the more the merrier. We're going to end the podcast with our traditional playing of a recommended song that fits into the very broad genre of retro's 80s synth. If you have a recommended song that you'd like played in the podcast, then please let me know. I also created a playlist of all the retro 80s synth songs that we have recommended since podcast number 1 using Google Play Music and Spotify. I've not yet made any progress on setting up an iTunes playlist. If you know how to set up a public iTunes playlist, then please let me know. I could use the help to get that set up. Check out the show notes for links to the current playlists. However, before we get to the retro 80s synth song, I wanted to mention that I was recently introduced to a very talented musician named David Miles Huber. His music is in the electronic, dance, and down-tempo genres. And his first set of work was published in 1982 using the Casio LV Tone, which you can listen to on his site. His current work is very interesting as it is focused on immersive 3D audio. Please check out the show notes for links to David's work and the podcast interview that I first heard of David that occurred on Twit TV's Home Theater Geeks podcast. So today's song is The Robots by Kraftwerk. And this song was released on the album The Man Machine. I'm pretty sure I first listened to this album early in 1984, as this would have been halfway through my sophomore year in high school, when my musical identity switched from heavy metal to more new wave. This change was driven by my interest in electronic music and computers, and what computers could do when connected to a synthesizer. This was still early days of MIDI, but I was aware of how cool it was, and I enjoyed the music a lot more than the heavy metal I was listening to. Plus, all my close group of friends were all into new wave music, and we started going to a lot of concerts about that time, and it just became ingrained in me. Anyways, back to Kraftwerk. The crazy thing is that this band actually formed in 1969, which is a year after I was born. The album this song was on was published in May of 1978, but it didn't really peak in the UK until February 1982, when the album, The Man Machine, was certified gold after shipping more than 100,000 copies in the UK. The version of The Robot that I have in my music collection is from their best of album called The Mix, and the song on the CD is 8 minutes and 57 seconds long. If you've never listened to Kraftwerk, then I hope my short song sample inspires you to check out their long history of impressive work. Plus, this band is still together and performing pretty regularly. I have, unfortunately, never seen them live, though. They are currently scheduled to play their full catalog of 8 albums over 4 days with a 3D visualization show in Italy from November 4th to the 7th, 2017. Links to more information about this song, the band, and this cool future concert are all in the show notes. Thank you so much for sharing your passion for churches with me. I continue to say this community is awesome because it really is. This has been Steve Holden for Churches Fan Podcast. Have a great day. The Churches Fan Podcast is licensed under Creative Commons Attribution Share Alike 4.0 International License by Steve Holden and AztecMedia.net. All rights reserved 2016 through 2017. If you have questions, then please email churchespodcast@gmail.com. Fair use notice. Reference material and media have been placed within this medium for informational, educational, and discussion purposes only, in compliance with the fair use criteria established in Section 107 of the Copyright Act of 1976. It should also be noted that the opinions expressed on this podcast are those of the participants and are not endorsed by the participants' previous, current, or future employers or advertisers, or any entity officially associated with churches. The song you are currently listening to is called The Enemy Is Him, the Dream Child Mix, from the movie The House of Him. You can get more information about the movie at Vimeo/ondemand/The House of Him. The song was scored for the film by Ian Cook and David Robert Simpson, and you can learn more about David's work at filmcomposer.scott.
You're still here? It's over. Go home. Go.